Hello, class. In this recording, we'll look at Zechariah chapter 9, verses 11 through 17. And we title this recording, Deliverance of His People and Conquest of Their Enemies. Let's read verse 11. As for you also, because of the blood of my covenant with you, I have set your prisoners free from the waterless pit. Return to the stronghold, O prisoners who have the hope. This very day I am declaring that I will restore double to you. The promise of restoration and blessing. The addressee, you, in verse 11, must be Jerusalem. The proclamation of kingship in verse 10 is followed by the release of captives in verse 11. I have set your prisoners free from the waterless pit. The waterless pit was a metaphor that refers to the Babylonian exile. Restoration and blessings for those still in Babylon is promised. It was on the basis of the Lord's unconditional covenant with Abraham, ratified by blood, we see back in Genesis chapter 15, that the Lord intervenes on behalf of his captive people. If they return to the stronghold, the Lord promises to restore double to them. Thus he promises great blessings to them in verse number 12. And of course, his covenant people are the Jews. We see the Lord will deliver his people from hostile powers. Let's read verse 13. For I will bend Judah as my bow, I will bend the bow with Ephraim, and I will stir up your sons, O Zion, against your sons, O Greece, and I will make you like a warrior's sword. The Lord will bend Judah as one bends a bow, fitting her the bow with Ephraim as an arrow. Merrill observes that the intense use of metaphor and simile here is clear. It is quite apparent that the Lord will use his people as a weapon against another nation, namely Greece. Interesting, Judah, the two southern tribes, as the bow, and Ephraim, the two northern tribes, is the arrow. That's God's people, namely against Greece. One should note that Greece had attained such strength by Zechariah's time that it did not require divine revelation to see that Greece's military ascendancy was imminent. But one should not conclude that from this that a literal confrontation of a military sort between Greece and Israel was in view. This again is the language of eschatology, the last days. Thus, what is being said is that whatever hostile power should ever arise against the covenant people can expect to meet resounding defeat at the hands of the Lord. The Lord guarantees victory for his people. Let's read verse 14. Then the Lord will appear over them, and his arrow will go forth like lightning. Another simile. And the Lord God will blow the trumpet and will march in the storm winds of the south. The Lord will appear over his covenant people, that is, as a banner guaranteeing the victory of his people. As in days of old when the Lord defeated Pharaoh and delivered Israel, he will shoot his arrows like lightning. He will blow the trumpet for advance and will ride forth on the chariot of the windstorms of the south. Eugene Merrill adds that this is the imagery of holy war, a medium especially expressive of the Lord's conflicts and conquests in eschatological times. The Lord will give the victory to his people. Let's read verse 15. The Lord of hosts will defend them, and they will devour and trample on the sling stones, and they will drink and be boisterous as with wine, and they will be filled like a sacrificial basin, drenched like the corners of the altar. The Holy War theme continues with the epithet, the Lord of Hosts, and further expansion of his anticipated conquests. The Lord of Hosts will arrive not only to subdue the enemies of God's covenant people, but also defend his people from their foes. They will devour and trample the enemy on the sling stones. This describes the consuming victory the Lord will give his people over their enemies. Having satiated themselves with the blood of their fallen enemies, the Lord's armies will be like the vessels of the sanctuary, filled with the flesh and blood of sacrifice. This bold figure suggests that the death of the Lord's foes is in some sense an offering to him. The covenant people are special to the Lord. This may be our last slide in this recording. Let's read verse 16 and 17. And the Lord, their God, will save them in that day as the flock of his people. For they are as the stones of a crown, sparkling in his land. For what comeliness and beauty will be theirs. Grain will make the young men flourish, and new wine the virgins. The eschatological character of the oracle is underlined again by the use of the classic phrase, in that day. The day will come when the Lord will ultimately vanquish every foe. The Lord, as their God, will deliver them in an ongoing way as a shepherd preserves his flock. Then, in an abrupt change of figure, he refers to his own people as precious stones bedecking a crown, stones that will shine brilliantly over all his land. The prophet writes, "For what comeliness and beauty will be theirs," to explain the preciousness and beauty of these jewels, which are after all the Lord's people. They have become so by the nurturing of the Lord, who has given his young men grain and his young women new wine. And I believe that is the last slide on this recording.